Alright, I promised you guys a while back, I don't know if I want to call it a promise, but I told you I would go over the script I wrote to try to grade your midterms, because I did write a script for that, because I hopefully will continue teaching this class in the coming semesters, and the more I can automate, the easier it'll be, and I'm all about efficiency. So if you recall from the midterm, there were three parts. The first part, you were supposed to log in using SSH with keys. The second part, you were supposed to complete some number of tasks as specified. In the third part, you're supposed to use VI to edit a file. So, how can I grade these things? Well, when you log in, it gets logged to a file that you logged in, and it notes whether you logged in using a public key or password, so that's easy enough to check. For the second part of the practical, where you had to execute some commands, I set up a special shell that records your session activity, and then I could look for your those commands in your session activity. That part proved to be the most difficult part for me to figure out for a number of reasons. One of which is there are more than one way to do some of the things I had you do. So I wrote the script to look for the command I was looking for, and if you did the exact command I was looking for, it was great. If you didn't, I had to go through your file and look for what you did to see if you did some other command that looked like what I wanted to do. So that wasn't perfect, but it saved me, half of the looking. If you did the command half the time, then I only had to look for half the stuff. And the third part was to edit a file with VI, so I used the diff command to compare your file with my sample file of what I thought it should have looked like when you finished. And then I compared that to see what you did not make look exactly like my file and awarded credit based on how close you were to what I was looking for. So now I've told you what we did, let's look a little bit at how we did it. So my file was called check T1sh. I'll go ahead and run it one time for my user ID because I created I had to create some sample output to run the file on. So this first part up here that showed up was where it was looking through the files to see what you did. This part here tells the command tells how long your session lasted. So I could use this part to see if you went beyond the supposed 1 hour mark you were supposed to have. So I could look at that. The next part I looked for SSH with keys. I did not log in with keys, so I got a 0 out of 15. I awarded partial credit based on how far you got, so I'll show you that. Essentially, if you logged in with keys, you got full credit. If you created key files but didn't actually log in, you got more credit. If you created an authorized keys file but did not successfully log in using keys, you got like 10 out of 15. If you ran the SSH keygen command but did not log in, you got 5 out of 15. If you didn't run the command at all, you got 0. Then I go through and look for the commands you were supposed to run. So here are the commands I had that I expected to see. Make gear test 1, chmod command. A lot of people did the symbolic mode instead of the absolute mode, which I guess that was okay. I don't remember what I told you to put. Some people did it without the 0 in front, which is fine. But my command was looking for this. So if you didn't do exactly what I was looking for, it tagged it as a failure, and I had to correct it later. And then the last part down here, it does the diff for the VI. Obviously, my file matched exactly what I was looking for because I knew exactly what I was looking for. So I don't have any output. If you had any lines, it would have been different. It would have showed up in that part. So let's actually look at the script. We've I have more. Yeah, there we go. We've done a lot of scripts so far that kind of are fake scripts because we just need to practice writing some scripts, and until you know what you're doing, you don't really have. It's hard to write it. It's hard to write scripts to do interesting stuff if you don't have anything interesting to do, right? Does that make any sense? So I had something interesting to do. So let's look at what I did. So first thing I did was I assigned the user variable to equal $1, and I checked to see if you logged in, right? If you didn't even log in, then there's no chance you complete the practical. So that made it easy. If you didn't log in, it says user did not log in, 0 out of 40, exiting. And then I exited. The T command, we haven't talked about the T command. The T command allows you to redirect the output into 2 places. So In this case, I'm appending it -a to a file called root test1 scores, where I was collecting everyone's score, or at least I was going to collect everyone's score. I'm not sure if I did that. Anyway, I put it there, and it also came to standard output so I could see it. So what happened, this got printed to standard output, and then it also got printed into this file. I use T a lot in this script so that I can create 2 copies of the output, one to the screen for me to see, and 1 copy into a file for me to save for later. So that's helpful. Next thing I do, if you logged in, then I look to see if there's a directory called results, because if I ran the script more than once, I would have already created a results directory, and it would give me an error, and I don't like seeing errors, so I went ahead and checked to see if I already created it. If I did create it, I did nothing. If I didn't create it, then I created a directory. And then if the directory already existed, then I probably had some files in there I want to get rid of, because if I run the script more than once, which I ended up running it a bunch of times until I got it right, I would keep creating duplicate output. Then I set some variable names to some file locations. Right, these are variables I referenced for creating the output. The out file was where I put the output of successful commands. The error file was where I put the output of unsuccessful commands. The session file was a file I created by running the command to dump your session using the special shell I installed. And in the command file, I processed your session file to pull the commands out. So basically, to do that, I looked for what our prompt should look like. Our prompt had like a square bracket and some other stuff, so I did that to look for your prompt. Then I wanted to create empty files and overwrite them to make sure I didn't have any other files already out there. I deleted the files, but just to be safe, I went ahead and echoed nothing into the file to kind of create the file, make sure it was empty. Then I changed the group on the file to be your user ID, so you would be able to read it. And I changed the permission to be readable by you, so you'd be able to read it. Because I wanted you to be able to read it, but I didn't want you to be able to write it or delete it. So that's that. The next part, we haven't talked about the input field separator, but by default, the input field separator is a space character or a tab character, white space essentially. In this case, I wanted the input field separator to be the whole line. I wanted the input to be the whole line, so I set the input field separator to a new line, which I saved the old IFS so I could use it again later, reset it, and then I set it to be a new line. I'll do an example of that later on because that's something I should show you. Taking notes of things to talk about. Then I do a for loop, essentially for every file that came out of the sudo, every line that came out of the sudo replay grep user grep minus b sep. So let's go ahead and look at that. So let's get out of here. This command, let's set user equal rbe. So this command, the sudo shell replay shows me all the sessions for the user. I'm going to look for my user ID, and I'm going to get rid of the SCP because the SCP showed up differently. So this gave me all the different sessions I did when I logged in to the server using my special ID. So then I get this line, and then I want to get some stuff out of this line in order to be able to process. So then I put for each, where did I go? Oh, here we go. For each line I process this line. I pull out the $I. I cut the $D. I cut based on the space and print field 3. So that gives me the time, how long it took. Then I append that to a string. I echo the line. I get the number of fields. Why did I do that? Oh, because that's the session. That means print the last. Print $NF means print the last field. Is going to print the last field. So that gives me the session. So if we look at this, that gives me this thing here because I need to use that to replay the file. And then I where we go. Then I replay the session and put that into the session file. Then I echo a new line to the session file to put a blank line in there, and then I'm done. So for every one of these lines, I pretty much play this session. So if we look at what it looks like when you replay the session, if I replay it with zeros, that just dumps a session. So here we have my session of what I did during that time I was logged in. I did an LS, I did an LS, I did an LS exit. I did an LS, and I looked at some files. So that was basically how I saw what you did by playing those commands, replaying those commands. So now I want to look at my file again. So once I had set your session file, I print out the time string, so that's the compilation, how much time it took you, and then I reset the IFS to the original field separator. Then I did this big, long, complex command, which basically took your session file, this grep dom, that was ugly. This grep for domu, that's how I found all of the commands that were in the file, because I only wanted the commands. I didn't really care about the output of the commands per se. Basically what that was looking for was your prompt, because our prompt says domu in it, unless you changed your prompt, which nobody did, I hope. So I looked for all the commands, because if you look at the file, all the commands would have had this line on it. And then I did some voodoo to basically clean up the command files. So we're not going to worry too much about that voodoo right now, because it's a little beyond what we need to worry about. And then I run a while loop to do some more voodoo that you probably don't need to worry about. Essentially, there was a scenario where the backspace characters were getting written as real literal characters in the file, and I needed to get rid of those, and this is how I got rid of those. So you can just ignore that. Let's see where we go. Yeah, so now we're down here. Now after I get done doing that, I have created a command file that has just the commands as clean as I could possibly get them. So now I have the stuff I need to proceed with grading. First thing I do is to check to see if you logged in with SSH. For instance, I look in this log file, these log files, and look for public key. If you logged in using keys, then that would have been successful. If you did not log in using keys, then it would print, hey, public key auth failed, and I'm going to look for authorized keys file. I looked in your home directory for an authorized keys file. If that file existed, that means you made it most of the way, but you just weren't able to figure out how to get the rest of the way. I saw that a few times with people who didn't have proper permissions on their file. Remember, your authorized keys has to be only readable by you. So then I gave you partial credit for that. If you did not have an authorized keys file, I looked to see if you ran the SSH keygen command. If you ran the keygen command, then you did something, so you get partial credit for that. And after that, if you didn't do any of those things, or there was no evidence that you did any of those things, then I echoed that you didn't do any of those things and gave you your score of 0 out of 15. All right, so that was looking for keys. Next thing I do is I set some variables so I can keep track of how many you have correct and how many you have incorrect. And then basically I do the same thing for every command I want to check for. So in this case, I have this loop that sets the found variable to equal to the output of this. So I do grep for makedir test1 in your command file. If you ran the command makedir test1 in your command file, then this would have been successful. And then I run this if statement, if-in found. That means if there's something in found, then print out that it was successful into the out file. Echo the variable into the out file so I can see what it was that you had in the output of that. And then I set the number correct variable to number correct plus 1. So that's how I tracked how many you got correct. If it was not found, then I printed the failure into an error file in what was in found, which in this case was probably nothing, since the statement says if found has something in it, do this stuff. So that's kind of a redundant line. It just printed a blank line. I can confirm that because that's what I saw when I ran it, and that's the end of the loop. So I essentially did that for all of the different activities I was expecting you to find. Did this work perfect? No. If somebody did make dir space slash home slash username slash test1, my script, my command would not have found it. But that's why when I would have looked in your failure file, then I would have went back manually and looked in your output file, command file, to see if you successfully completed that in some other way. So things I'm going to do in the future. In the future, I'm going to modify this to include other valid commands. So I'll in some way, I'm going to look for make dir test1. Also, I'm going to look for make dir ./test1. I'm also going to look for make dir /home /username /test1. I'm going to look for more of the possible expected results, if you will. So that way, it'll make my script more predictable and more accurate. So that's a feature request I put in with the development team, and they'll get on that as soon as they can. So essentially, I did that for all of the different things we're looking for. There were like 14 things I was looking for. I basically looked for all those things in there, and then I printed out the number correct. So I kept a running total of how many you got correct, and I printed that out. So that became your initial raw score. Then I went back and looked at things manually to see how they looked. Then the next part was to look at your VI file. So then I said, hey, if the file exists, because you were supposed to copy your VI file into this location, then echo it exists and begin the diff. And then I did a diff command to show me the comparison of my file that I expected with your file. And then I manually looked at that and assigned a score manually just looking at that. So I would look at that and be like, okay, your VI file, everything is where it's supposed to be. So you get 10 out of 10, or if you missed a couple lines that you were supposed to change, you get like an 8 out of 10 or whatever. So that was pretty much that. So so my script had 218 lines. I probably spent 20 hours working on it. I had a hard time cleaning up the commands. So just for fun, let's talk about that for a minute. If we go back and run my thing here, see if I had a, no, I didn't have a sample in that case. Let me look for something I want to show you. There, let's see. This one. What the heck? So let's look at this one. Oh, I know what the problem is. So here's the problem. If you look at this, everything looks great, right? The command looks perfect. But if I redirect that into a file, and I look at that file, what you see is we have these non-printing characters. This Control G was a non-printing character. Some Control H's. So if we look at what was really causing me problems, this is what was causing me problems with the command. This really says CD food. If you look back at the output of the commands, it says CD foods, but since the tool CD food, since the tool was saving my keystrokes, it was saving the backspace command. So all these things go together to make a backspace, and there's 3 of them. So what I typed was CD space D00 backspace 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 food, right? So all that voodoo that was in the file all existed to try to clean up all of this nonsense so that I could have an actual file that had the commands in it. If we look at, I was in VI. If we look at my actual file that I ended up with, that where I put the output? If we look at my actual file that I ended up with after I did the Voodoo, then I had the actual commands, and it actually ended up coming out right. But it took me, I probably spent 20 hours working on the script, and it took me probably 17 of those hours to clean up the command output, because that was a lot of trial and error. I mean, if you recall the Voodoo I had in there, this part, looks for the commands, and it uses the tr command to delete a bunch of special characters. Then it uses sed to get rid of some other junk that was in the way of making things easily to read. Uses 4 different sed commands to get rid of some special stuff. And then after I get done with the special stuff, I had a bunch of these bracket Ks left. So I needed to go through and delete all the bracket Ks, but I could only do them one at a time because I also needed to get the command in front of it. So it was just a huge pain. It's done now, and that's good because in subsequent semesters, I'll be able to finish grading in an hour or less. My ultimate goal is to have the script written, and once you have copied your file over, have the script automatically run and send you a link to a page that you can go click on in the browser to look at your results. Have it done automatically, and that's not far off now that I've got the script done to do what it needs to do. That's not far off. That's actually pretty trivial to do at this point. I just haven't got to it yet. I've submitted the ticket to the development team, but they're a little behind. So that's an example of writing a script to do something real. So it probably seems very overwhelming right now because it kind of is, but you have the tools you need. You have the looping logic and the decision logic. We've talked about almost all the commands that you need to do these things. It's just a matter of being able to tie them together in a logical manner that gets done what you want to get done.